coffee and donuts. That's what they sent us to France with, not guns or grenades, coffee and donuts, like we were heading to a church social instead of the Western Front, like hot beverages and fried dough could somehow make a difference when men were dying by the thousands in mud and blood and poison gas. The thing is, sometimes they did make a difference, just not the kind you'd think. I'm 63 years old now, and people still ask me about the war. They see the old Red Cross pin I sometimes wear, and they get this look in their eyes, warm, nostalgic. They think they know what I did. They think I was safe behind the lines, serving coffee in some nice canteen, smiling at boys and making them feel like they had a piece of home. They're wrong. My name is Margaret Maggie Sullivan, and I was a Red Cross volunteer with a mobile canteen unit attached to the 1st Infantry Division. We didn't stay behind the lines. We went to them, sometimes past them. And what I saw in those trenches, what I heard and smelled and touched, it destroyed any illusions I had about war being noble or clean or anything other than an abattoir dressed up in flags and patriotic songs. I was 27 when I volunteered in early 1918. Old maid by most standards. I'd been engaged once, but he died in a factory accident in 1915. After that, I threw myself into work. I was a school teacher in Pittsburgh, and when the Red Cross came recruiting for volunteers to go to France, I signed up. My mother was horrified. "That's no place for a lady," she said. "War is men's business." But I wanted to do something, wanted to matter, wanted to prove that a woman could serve her country too, even if they wouldn't let us carry rifles. So they trained us how to drive trucks, how to make industrial quantities of coffee, how to set up mobile canteens, how to stay calm under fire, they said, though they never really explained what that meant. We thought we'd be serving coffee at railway stations, maybe at base camps, smiling for the camera, boosting morale, sending letters home about the brave boys we were helping. Clean work, important, but safe. We were so naive. We arrived in France in March 1918, right when the Germans launched their spring offensive. The whole front was chaos, divisions getting pushed back, casualties flooding the aid stations, everyone saying the Germans might actually break through and win the war. Our supervisor, a stern woman from Boston named Mrs. Hendricks, gathered us together the first day. 6 of us, me, 2 other teachers, a nurse who'd been rejected for field hospital work because of her age, and 2 society women who'd thought this would be an adventure. "Ladies," Mrs. Hendricks said, "I won't lie to you. What they told you in training was sanitized. The real work is harder. You'll see things no woman should see. You'll hear things that will haunt you. But those boys out there need us. They need something normal, something that reminds them of home. Sometimes a cup of coffee and a kind word is the only thing standing between a soldier and complete despair." She was right about all of it. Our first run to the front was near Cantigny in late May. We loaded up our truck, a converted Ford with a coffee boiler in the back, boxes of donuts, cigarettes, writing paper, drove through the night toward the sound of artillery that never stopped, that constant rolling thunder that made the earth shake. I was driving. My hands were sweating on the wheel, slipping every time we hit a pothole. The closer we got, the worse the roads became, chewed up by tank treads and shell craters littered with debris and bodies. We passed bodies in ditches, bodies in the road that we had to swerve around. Nobody had time to collect them all. The other girls were quiet in the back. Clara, one of the society women, was crying softly. I wanted to cry too, but someone had to keep us moving. We reached the support trenches just before dawn. An exhausted lieutenant directed us to a relatively safe spot, though safe was relative when shells were landing 100 yards away. We set up the canteen, got the coffee boiling, laid out the donuts, put up our little sign that said Red Cross, Coffee and Comfort. The soldiers came shambling up from the forward positions in groups of 4 or 5. They looked like ghosts, caked in mud, eyes hollow, moving with the slow deliberation of men who'd forgotten what it meant to be fully human. Some were wounded, bandaged, limping. All were exhausted. The first one to reach us was a boy, couldn't have been more than 19. He stared at the coffee like he'd forgotten what it was. "It's hot," I told him, handing him a cup. "Real coffee, and there's sugar if you want it." He took it with shaking hands, brought it to his face, and just breathed in the steam for a long moment. When he finally looked at me, there were tears running down his dirty cheeks. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered. "Thank you." That's when I understood. This wasn't about coffee. We served 300 men that morning. 300 soldiers rotating back from the forward trenches for a few hours of rest before they had to go back. 300 boys who'd been living in hell, and we were giving them coffee and donuts and pretending everything was normal. But you can't pretend when you're close enough to see, close enough to smell. They reeked, all of them, mud and sweat and blood and decay. The trenches stank of death, and the smell clung to them, soaked into their uniforms, their skin. Some had rats in their pockets, kept them as pets because the rats were the only living things other than lice that shared their holes. Others had pieces of their friends on them, literal pieces, blood and matter they hadn't noticed or were too tired to care about. I served coffee to a sergeant whose hands were shaking so badly he couldn't hold the cup. I had to help him, hold it to his lips like he was a child. He drank it down, scalding hot, and asked for another. When I poured it, I noticed his hands. The fingernails were torn off, all of them. "Wire," he said, seeing me stare. "Was tangled in German wire last night. Had to tear my way out. I wanted to be sick. Wanted to run back to the truck and drive away and never come back, but I just nodded and gave him his coffee and a donut and watched him eat it with those ruined hands." A private came up asking for writing paper. He wanted to send a letter home to his mother. I gave him paper and a pencil, and he sat down right there in the mud to write. I watched him scratch out 3 sentences, then stop, stare at the paper, cross it out, start again. After 10 minutes, he crumpled it up and threw it away. "What do I tell her?" he asked me. "How do I explain what it's like? She thinks I'm having an adventure. She thinks I'm making her proud." He laughed, a bitter sound. "I bayoneted a man 2 days ago, stuck him in the stomach and watched him die. How do I put that in a letter to my mother?" I had no answer. What could I say? So I just gave him more paper and told him he was brave and that his mother loved him. Lies. Kind lies, maybe, but lies. Clara stopped serving after an hour. A soldier had reached for a donut, and his sleeve had pulled back, revealing his wrist. It was black with gangrene, rotting while he was still alive. She saw it, went pale, and walked away, sat by the truck and stared at nothing. Mrs. Hendricks kept working, served coffee, smiled, chatted like we were at a social. But I saw her hands when she thought no one was looking, saw them shaking, saw her pouring coffee past the rim of cups because she couldn't steady herself. The shelling got worse around mid-morning. The Germans had spotted our position, or maybe they were just firing randomly. Shells started landing closer. The soldiers barely reacted. They were so used to it, they just ducked a little and kept drinking their coffee. But we weren't used to it. The other teacher, Ruth, dropped a whole tray of cups when a shell hit 50 yards away. The noise was incredible, like standing next to a thunderclap. A shell landed in the trench about 200 yards from us. I heard the screaming immediately. Then I saw them bringing up the wounded. 4 men on stretchers, one walking but missing his arm below the elbow, just a stump wrapped in a bloody rag. They brought them past our canteen on the way to the aid station. I saw one man's face, or what was left of it. Half of it was just gone, torn away by shrapnel. He was still alive, making sounds that weren't quite human. Blood everywhere, pieces of bone visible through the meat. One of the society women, Elizabeth, saw him and fainted, just dropped. We had to drag her into the truck while the soldiers stepped around her, not even curious. They'd seen worse. Hell, they'd been worse. That's when I realized we were performing a play. We were actors pretending this was normal, that coffee could fix what was broken here, that smiling women and fried dough could somehow make sense of the insanity. And the soldiers were playing along because the alternative was accepting that there was no normal anymore, that home was a fantasy, that they were trapped in hell and there was no way out. We went back every week, sometimes more. Different sectors, different units, but always the same. Always the coffee and donuts and pretending. Always the hollow-eyed boys who'd seen too much. Always the smell and the mud and the screaming. I got better at it, learned to smile no matter what I saw, learned to keep my hands steady when serving men who were clearly dying, clearly too wounded to be anything but casualties waiting to happen. Learned to make small talk about weather and home and anything except the war that surrounded us. But I never got used to it. There was a boy from Chicago, Private Lewis. He came to our canteen 6 times over 3 weeks, always polite, always thanked me by name, always asked how I was doing like we were neighbors meeting on a street corner. The 6th time I saw him, he'd changed. Something in his eyes had gone dead. He took his coffee without speaking, without even looking at me. I found out later he'd been ordered to lead a patrol into no man's land. They'd stumbled into a German position in the dark, hand-to-hand fighting in a shell crater. Lewis killed 3 men with his knife, killed them up close, felt them die in his hands. He was 18 years old. He never came back to the canteen after that. I heard he walked into German machine gun fire 2 weeks later, just stood up and walked toward it. They called it a heroic charge. The other men in his unit knew better. We lost Clara in June. Not killed, she just broke. Started screaming one day while we were setting up, wouldn't stop. They had to sedate her and ship her back to a hospital in Paris. Last I heard, she never spoke again, just stares at walls. Ruth quit in July, said she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't pretend that what we were doing mattered when boys were dying by the thousands. Mrs. Hendricks tried to convince her to stay, but Ruth was done. We're serving coffee in hell, she said, and acting like it helps. But it doesn't help. Nothing helps. Maybe she was right, but we kept serving anyway. The worst was Belleau Wood. The Marines had been fighting there for weeks, taking horrific casualties in close-quarters combat in the forest. When we finally got clearance to bring the canteen up, I'd never seen men so destroyed. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were animals, barely human. Some couldn't speak, some couldn't stop shaking. One Marine took a cup of coffee from me and just held it, staring into it like he could see something in there that I couldn't. After 5 minutes, he poured it on the ground and walked away without a word. I served coffee to a captain who'd lost his entire company. 83 men under his command. 7 survived. He sat drinking coffee and crying, not making a sound, just tears running down his face while he mechanically raised the cup to his lips. Drink, lower, raise, drink. Like a machine, like he'd forgotten how to be anything else. My breaking point came in September during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. We'd been running canteen operations for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, constantly moving to keep up with the advance. I was exhausted, running on coffee and nerves. We'd set up in a small ravine that was supposed to be safe from direct fire. The soldiers were lined up for coffee when the shelling started. Not random fire, a sustained barrage. The Germans had spotted us or gotten lucky. Either way, shells started landing in the ravine. The soldiers scattered, diving for cover. We tried to get to the truck, but a shell landed right next to it. The explosion flipped it, sent our coffee boiler flying, scattered donuts and supplies across the ground. I was thrown back, landed hard, couldn't hear anything but ringing. When I got up, I saw Elizabeth. She'd been standing next to the truck when the shell hit. She wasn't there anymore, not all of her. I found pieces. That's all I'll say about that. Pieces. Mrs. Hendricks was wounded, shrapnel in her leg and side. Ruth was unconscious. I was somehow unhurt except for the ringing in my ears and the knowledge that I'd just watched someone I knew get blown apart. A medic came running, started treating Mrs. Hendricks while soldiers dragged Ruth to cover. I just stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of our canteen, staring at what was left of Elizabeth. A young lieutenant came up to me, grabbed my shoulders. "Ma'am, you need to take cover. Ma'am, can you hear me?" I could hear him, but I couldn't move, couldn't process what I was seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were Red Cross. We were bringing coffee. We were supposed to be helping, supposed to be safe, supposed to be making a difference. But we were just targets, just more bodies for the meat grinder. The war didn't care that we were women, didn't care about our good intentions. It would kill us just as indifferently as it killed everyone else. The lieutenant pulled me to cover, sat me down in a shell crater. Other soldiers were there, pressed against the walls, waiting for the barrage to end. One of them offered me his canteen. Water, not coffee. I drank it and tasted blood in my mouth from biting my tongue. "You okay, ma'am?" one of them asked. I wanted to laugh, wanted to scream, wanted to tell him that no, I wasn't okay, that none of us were okay, that this whole thing was insane and we were all pretending otherwise. But I just nodded. "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you for asking." Another lie. I had so many lies by then. The war ended 2 months later. The armistice came and everyone celebrated, and we packed up what was left of our canteen and went home. They gave us medals, had ceremonies, told us we'd done important work, that we'd served with honor and distinction, that we'd helped win the war. I came back to Pittsburgh in January 1919. My mother threw a welcome home party. All the neighbors came, asked me about France, about the boys I'd served, about whether I'd had any adventures. I smiled and told them it had been hard work but rewarding, that the soldiers had been so grateful, that I was proud to have served. I didn't tell them about the smell, about the screaming, about Private Lewis who walked into machine gun fire, or the sergeant with no fingernails, or the boy who couldn't write a letter to his mother. I didn't tell them about Elizabeth blown to pieces while trying to serve coffee and donuts to men who were already halfway dead. I went back to teaching, stood in front of classrooms full of children and tried to care about spelling tests and multiplication tables, but all I could see were the boys I'd served coffee to, wondering how many of them were dead now, how many had made it home. How many were like me, going through the motions of living while still stuck in those trenches, still smelling the mud and blood, still hearing the shells? I tried to join the local Red Cross chapter, thought maybe helping others would help me. But I lasted one meeting. They were planning charity drives and fundraisers and talking about the war like it had been a great adventure, like we'd gone over there and had tea parties with soldiers and come home with wonderful stories. I excused myself and never went back. The nightmares started about 6 months after I returned. I'd dream about serving coffee to dead men, to corpses that stood in line and held out cups with rotting hands. I'd dream about Elizabeth, about finding pieces of her scattered in the mud. I'd dream about that captain from Belleau Wood, crying silently while drinking coffee, and I'd try to help him, but I couldn't because my hands would only pour more coffee, endless coffee, drowning him in it. I never married. Men would ask to court me, and I'd make excuses. How could I explain what I'd become? How could I let someone close enough to see the damage? I was good at pretending during the day, but at night when the nightmares came, I wasn't Maggie Sullivan, the school teacher. I was someone else, someone broken. People talk about the Great War, and they talk about soldiers, about the boys who fought and died and came home changed. Nobody talks about the women who went, the nurses and volunteers and canteen workers who saw the same things, smelled the same smells, heard the same screaming. We're invisible in the stories they tell, but we were there, and we saw, and we carried it all home with us, just like the soldiers did. I still can't drink coffee, haven't touched it since 1918. The smell makes me sick, brings everything back. Which is funny in a horrible way. I spent months serving it, making it, smelling it constantly. Now, I can't be in the same room when someone brews a pot. I kept my Red Cross pin. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, try to remember the woman who thought coffee and donuts could make a difference in hell. She seems like a stranger now, some naive girl who thought she could help, who thought good intentions and kindness could somehow matter in the face of industrial slaughter. Maybe we did help. Maybe that boy who cried when I gave him coffee. Maybe it meant something to him. Maybe Private Lewis had a few good moments before he died. Maybe the soldiers we served remembered us, and it gave them something to hold on to. Or maybe Ruth was right. Maybe we were just actors in a play pretending our little canteen mattered while the real show, the killing and dying, went on around us. Maybe we were just fooling ourselves, making ourselves feel useful while accomplishing nothing. I don't know. 30 years later, and I still don't know. What I do know is this. They sent us to France with coffee and donuts, told us to smile and be kind and give the boys a taste of home. They didn't tell us we'd be serving coffee to ghosts, to boys who were already dead but hadn't stopped moving yet. They didn't tell us we'd see things no one should see, that we'd carry those images forever, that we'd spend the rest of our lives trying to pretend we were normal while pieces of us stayed in those trenches, in that mud, in that hell. Elizabeth died trying to serve coffee to soldiers who were being blown apart by artillery. I watched her die, and I couldn't do anything about it, couldn't save her, couldn't even collect all of her afterward. She died for coffee and donuts and the idea that maybe kindness mattered in war. I'm 63 years old now, and I still don't know if it mattered, if any of it mattered. I served coffee to thousands of soldiers, and most of them probably died. Does that mean I helped them, gave them comfort? Or did I just make their last days slightly more bearable before they were destroyed? They gave me a medal. It's in a drawer somewhere. I don't look at it, because every time I do, I smell coffee mixed with mud and blood. I see Elizabeth's pieces scattered in a ravine. I hear that captain crying silently. I feel Private Lewis's dead eyes on me, asking why coffee and donuts weren't enough to save him. We went to war with coffee and donuts, like we were going to a church social, like kindness could defeat artillery, like smiles could stop machine guns, like fried dough could heal what war destroyed. It couldn't. Nothing could, but we tried. God help us, we tried, and it destroyed us anyway.